Hello, podcast listeners. We know podcasts are a great way to catch up on a program that you may have missed on KSJE, and it's provided as a free service of this radio station. But KSJE is now listener-supported, and so while you enjoy this podcast, we hope that you'll also take some time to join KSJE. Become a member today. It's quite easy to do. Just go to our website at ksje.com/support and pick the level of support that best matches your budget. Thanks again for listening. Here's your podcast.
Welcome back to Right on Four Corners. I'm your host, DelSheree Gladden. I'm a writer and editor, and I have over 30 published novels. And for those who listened to the previous episode, I recorded this one the same day, so I still sound terrible, and I apologize for that. But I do have Miss Donnell Ann Bell on the show this week, and she's going to be talking about two of her books, Black Pearl and Until Dead, which I had the opportunity to read and just really enjoyed. Donnell, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks, DelSheree. My name is Donnell, and I grew up in Farmington, and I consider it my hometown. I've written 6 published books through Bellbridge Books in Memphis, Tennessee, and I am working on book 7. I went to NMSU and I attended Denver Academy of Court Reporting, and when an accident affected my left hand, it led to writing, and so here I am.
It's been a while, actually, since I've had someone actually from Farmington, so that's nice that you're familiar with this area and have that connection. It's been really great to get a chance to read your books. I have enjoyed them so much. They've been a nice break, not only from work, which has been really crazy lately, but just something different than what I've been reading for some of my other guests, which was also just a pleasure to be able to dive into some mystery and meet your characters. So tell our listeners a little bit about the 2 books overall and the characters, without giving anything away. Just give people an idea of what the 2 books are about and the genre and all of that.
No spoiler alerts, I get it. After I attended court reporting and decided to go into work for newspapers, I discovered that my first love is mystery. So I started reading tons of mystery books. And one of the things that I noticed was that in amateur sleuths or in crime scene writing, they always have one protagonist. And that protagonist generally has a sidekick or someone who has a in the police department. If you have a private detective, he has somebody who can call. One of my favorite authors is Robert Crace, and his protagonist, Elvis Cole, always calls the police department, and he flirts with this one woman, and she gives him all the information she needs. And I thought, you know what? I want to be the source. I want to go to where my operatives don't have to call up anybody. They are the source. So I decided to write a task force series. And in that series, I have the Denver Police Department. I have a Colorado Springs Police Department. I have the FBI. And in Until Dead, I bring in ATF. So if I need information, guess what? They're already there.
And that is a fun aspect of this. I like that you brought so many in, especially in the first one in Black Pearl. You do have the officer from the Colorado Springs Police Department, and she's not necessarily inexperienced, but she's used to dealing with different types of cases when she's brought in on the task force. And then you have kind of a newish FBI agent who's just kind of getting his feet, but very talented and very, very intelligent. And then you have some more veteran officers with Denver Police and with the FBI. And it was a fun range of personalities and abilities and their experience. And it created an interesting dynamic. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about how you developed the characters individually and then how you played them off of each other through the stories.
Lieutenant Everett Chief Hope is someone who I based on. I worked for a company called GTE Government Systems back in the day in Mesa, Arizona. And I had an electrical engineer friend who, his name was Jake Pope. And I determined I love this man so much that if I ever had a chance to create a character, I would name him Pope. And although Lieutenant Pope is quite different than Jake, he just kind of sailed off the page for me. I call him a gift character. Brian is my FBI agent, the protagonist of the story, the leader of the group. And one of the things is, because I own a group called Crime Scene Writer, I have access to ask a lot of questions. And I've been co-owner of this group so long that people allow me to call or bother, that they'll say, how about a phone call? How about a Zoom? And I can create these characters because I can ask questions and get inside these characters' heads more than, say, somebody who's just Googling or trying to do online research. So I go to the source when I create these characters.
That's such a valuable tool that can be really difficult, I think, for newer writers to find something like that and to make those connections, but definitely worthwhile to make the effort and to try to get that firsthand knowledge. I think it really made a great difference in this. You don't go about the story. It's not like super procedural as far as like really getting into the nitty-gritty parts. That's really kind of its own genre in a lot of ways. But there's a lot of realism, and I appreciated that the steps that they're taking made sense, seemed logical, as well as just from some of my own writing and research, I've learned to kind of notice some of those writing techniques that take a little more fictional license with how an investigation might go. And for whatever reason that might be. But like I could tell reading it as a reader and as a fellow writer that you really put in the effort to make the investigations and the procedure that you do go into as realistic as possible. And that did lend a lot of just overall credibility to the story. And I think with certain books where you do need a lot of realism, reading as a reader, if you don't get that sense off the bat, then it's a little bit harder to trust the writer and to really get into the story. And I found that really easy to do with both of your books. I had that confidence that you knew what you were writing about. You'd put in that time and effort to make it accurate and realistic. And then that really let me just enjoy the story and the characters more.
Well, thank you. I would say to anybody who's interested in writing, that research is your friend. It's a tool. You can get bogged down in it. But one of the things that I would always say, if you can go to the source, and police officers and citizens academies and FBI agents, they are all willing to talk to you. So you can get your research right, because readers are they're not your television readers. They are into these stories, and they will pick up on an error so fast that they're more discerning than your typical TV watcher, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of mystery readers especially, that's what they read. And they may, have other interests in there, but a lot of mystery writers read a lot of mystery. They learn about,
on television, you can suspend disbelief. In reading, you'll have somebody throw a book against the wall.
Yeah, it's so much more of a time investment. You watch an hour-long episode of something on TV, that's one thing. When you're putting, 8 to 12 or more hours into reading a book, I think that expectation as a reader is different. And they want to be rewarded for that effort. And when maybe that time and effort hasn't been taken to make things accurate and do that research, it can be very frustrating for the reader.
That's so true. One of the things that I've learned in writing is that, and I do have a lot of characters, that is because it's a bigger book. But I've heard over the years, if you can combine characters who do one or things, for instance, if you notice in Black Pearl and Until Dead, Special Agent Devin Taylor, he has a psychology degree and he's an IT expert. So I combined something so I didn't have to have all these characters on top of each other. So if you notice that I did that, Allison Shannon was, spoiler alert, she's familiar with Montrose, Colorado versus being a police officer. So it really is, it's called tight writing and trying not to, my chapters are short. I'm a fan of shorter chapters. I like to combine and put emotion on the page. Without emotion on the page, you don't have a story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did appreciate that with yours, because there is a good group of characters as you've introduced them, but it didn't feel overwhelming to have that many characters to get to know and to follow. And that is really great advice, to try to pair up the needs of the story into a single character where you can. I think that really helps from not having 14 different people that the reader's expected to keep track of. That gets really hard to do as the reader and as
that's true.
writer too. I think it's easier to make mistakes and forget things and not keep things consistent if you have too many people you're trying to keep track of as well.
Exactly. Spreadsheets are your friends.
Yeah, everybody has their own method. I've heard, the character Bible. Some people do lengthy individual profiles of each character to keep things straight. I think that's just an individual thing of how people work best in keeping track of their information. But definitely, I think when you have a large cast and they're featured characters, that was something that was interesting with yours. It wasn't like Brian's the main character and these are satellite characters. Allison really, especially in the first book in Black Pearl, is right there in the middle of everything. She plays a big role. In the second book, she's not as prominent, but then you have Pope being more prominent, and you get a little bit more of Devon's story. And so that was nice. Between the two books, you get to know them a little bit more. But even in the first book, where you don't get as much page time with Pope, he still felt like a real and important character, and I was getting to know him on a level that was appropriate to the story. And that's something that can be tricky to do as a writer, to balance out the page time of 4 to 5 main characters and then determine how much development they need in that story. How did you approach that, or did it just kind of come naturally as you were writing?
No, it didn't come naturally. As you know, as a writer, one of the phrases that I've always heard is, whose story is it? And I had to think about that long and hard, because I had, 4 protagonists or 4 point of view characters. And that was really tough. But I decided that I had to be a fearless creator, and I had to tell the story the way it was coming out on my outlines and how I had it envisioned in my head. And so the great thing about series is I can do exactly what I did. I paid more attention to Allison, because typically this was her story. She was getting closure by going to Montrose. And one of the things that your readers might, or your listeners might, find interesting is I can write male detectives and male police officers a little bit easier, because I'm not so close as a woman myself. But one of the things I found so hard was developing Allison's character, because I am a woman and she's a woman, and I wanted to get it right. So I did a ride-along, and I went riding along with a Colorado Springs field training officer who, in Black Pearl, Allison is a field training officer. And the great thing about it is this field training officer and I brainstormed, and she said to me something that just hit home. If you've read some books where your protagonist is, an alcoholic and sleeping with every guy in the story, that she said, please don't make her lose. She used another word. And please don't make her stupid. We don't get where we are by not being smart. And I also talked to 2 other police officers, and they were instrumental in helping me develop Allison. So I'm intensely proud of her character.
So, and you should be. Yeah, I really enjoyed her character. I think that especially female police officers, like you said, there can be a lot of easy stereotypes to fall into. Mm-hmm. And I've definitely come across those in both TV and in fiction, in novels. And that was something that struck me about Allison pretty quickly. She didn't fit an expected mold. She had a really interesting background with some trauma in her past that had put her on this path to becoming a police officer. But she she channeled it in an interesting way of how she dealt with it, to where it wasn't her only identity. It didn't drive everything that she did. It was there. It was important to her. It influenced her. But she had a lot of other factors in her life, her family and how her parents dealt with the situation, and then her drive in her career. And so she really had a lot of aspects of her personality that came into play that helped develop who she was in my mind as I'm reading it, that she felt very rounded out, which was nice, because I think that is really something that's difficult to do, especially writing a character who's coming from a background of severe trauma.
Right. And she will be back in book 3 she'll expand more on her story. And I do write suspense, so I have to really concentrate on that angle. The whole team, I try to bring them back if they can. ATF won't be in the next book, but that was another, I got to talk to ATF officers or senior agents who helped me with what the ATF would do in Until Dead. It's all about, and I say this to anyone who's writing a book, you can do Wikipedia, you can do Google, but if you can go to the source, if you need something on poison, go talk to your pharmacist, go talk to anyone. And if you call these places, you might get a no, but if you don't call, the answer is always no. They're usually very cooperative.
I have to agree with that. Yeah, most people or organizations that I've reached out to for book research, they're usually really excited and happy to help. On occasion, when they haven't been able to, time, or just, maybe they're not the right person to give that information, it still often will point you in a different direction on where you can find that information and develop those relationships with people who can be really big assets to helping you understand something better.
Absolutely. And I, as a co-owner of Crime Scene Writer, that has been a real blessing to be able to actually pick up the phone and have a conversation, just kind of like we're doing in our interview.
Now, tell me your approach to developing the mystery storyline and keeping the suspense throughout it, because that was something that through reading both books, you did a really good job of keeping the pace consistently interesting. And of course, there's some lulls when they're needed and to process information and everything. But I never hit a point in either book where I felt like it dragged or it moved too fast that I couldn't keep up with what was going on. So what is your approach to working on pacing as you're going through the plot?
Thank you for that. I feel pacing is the most important thing in a book, in addition to emotion and making sure that your readers can connect with the characters. I think, and because I do have a lot of police procedure, I do have a lot of procedure in it. Dialogue can help you. Just knowing the content on the page, you don't distract the reader by using terminology that they won't know. I hope I came clear because I used a lot of acronyms, but I think I explained them to them. And of course, you always end on a hook. You're always aware that there should be twists and turns and surprises in your story, especially if you're writing suspense. Because if nothing happens, you're not entertaining your reader. And that's what we do as suspense writers or writers in general. We're there to entertain.
Absolutely. I think something that I really enjoyed about both of these books was that I constantly felt like I was learning as I was going through the storyline. One of the approaches that I like to take, and especially when I work with younger writers, the idea of pacing is sometimes really hard to grasp. And especially if all they've really known is, the 3-act structure and here's the roller coaster. And they have in their mind, the major points of a story. Okay, we've got to hit this point where there's a problem, and then there's going to be, someone new introduced, and then we're going to have some action, and then we're going to come down from that action. In an overall view, that can be helpful. But when you're actually writing, it's hard, not to go off into the weeds on something else. And then you look back at the chapter and you're like, what actually happened here? But taking that approach of each chapter is a mini story. And it has to have a
Absolutely.
beginning, middle,
Writing
and
is
end.
rewriting too.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Writing is rewriting. But also you'll know if you're going on and on. If you're putting too much backstory, readers I always say keep the momentum going forward. Backstory should be fed in gradually. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think one of the things that like slow down a story so much is when you just get that huge chunk of here's this character's life story and this is why they are who they are. And now let's get back to the regular story. It's like, oh, you probably lost half the people who are reading. It needs
It's called
to
an
be worked in.
information dump.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that can happen.
You do not want an information dump.
Yes, it's overwhelming. And I think that was something that was people had a little bit more tolerance for in years past with different styles of writing. But I think today's reader expects to stay engaged consistently throughout the story. And I think when the writer takes a deep dive off into something else, whether that be backstory or really extensive information on something or another in the story, or just something unrelated, which also happens, it breaks the flow. It makes it hard for the reader to stay connected. And you can easily lose readers at those points.
The good thing about that is you have beta readers and critique partners and an editor who is fearless about telling you no. So I'm always grateful for that.
Yes, I think, and that's something with newer writers, whether young or just this is their first foray into it, that's really scary to hand over your writing to someone to get those opinions. Because I think we all instinctually know, like, there's going to be some parts of this that need fixed or are just bad, or characters or storylines that don't make sense. And like bracing yourself to get that information back from someone is hard to do.
That is such a great point. And I would tell people who are writers who are, submitting their query letters and they get a rejection and they fall apart. I always tell them, you're doing your job. If you're getting a rejection letter, that means it's not rejecting you. It's rejecting the story because for whatever reason, marketing or whatever. But if you have a good editor and you have critique partners who aren't on an ego trip themselves and are there to genuinely help you grow that story, that is the most fantastic thing you can have. In all of my books, I've gotten revision letters. I'm sure you have too, DelSheree.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things in my debut book, my editor sent me a revision letter, and it was one page, single space. And I thought, why did she buy the book? She's got all these changes for me. But it was so great because she made it a better book. And so it's a team effort. And, my agent at the time I wrote romantic suspense. I started with romantic suspense, and you had to have a sex scene, right? You had to have a sex scene. And my editor at Bell Bridge said, you know what, let's get rid of these sex scenes because you're not really good at it. We bought you for the suspense. That just lightened the load off of me because so a good editor, I always say this, and Deborah Dixon, who is the author of Goal, Motivation, and Conflict, and is a staple in publishing, is my editor. And she does not let me get away with anything. And it makes it a better book.
That's wonderful. That's so great when you find critique partners or a group or an editor that you work with well, who calls you out on things, but who does it in a supportive and helpful way. That can be really difficult to find someone like that at times. So that's awesome that you were able to connect with her and that it has gone so well.
Thank you.
Tell me about the third book in the series that you're working on and just what your approach is and how that's going and whether or not you have a timeline.
I do have a timeline, and I have to get to work really soon, but I've got some personal issues going on in my life right now with my mom. She's 89, and fortunately, my editor is very, very patient with me. But in book 2, I left off with a surprise. So I don't want to give too much away, but suffice it to say, when you have a task force, they don't stay together indefinitely. It's for this one thing. So I have to always find a way. If you notice in Until Dead, these people had, Devin was in New York, and Allison she had just completed another part of her training. And so I had to find a way to bring them back into the task force. And I did that through a character who was very demanding and said, I want this done. So in book 3, I have a surprise, and I'm working on, basically it's his story and closure for that character.
Well, that'll be interesting because, you've built some interesting, and I'm trying to think of the right word for it, but you've built in with several of your characters that they have some areas of their past that we've gotten hints about, and we know that they have affected them, but we don't know the details. And that was something that I wanted to ask you about, of plans for the series overall, and slowly unveiling some of those backstories for these characters that you've hinted at so far.
At this point, I think book 3 may be the last of this series, because the task force is very, very hard and a lot of research. I've had to do a lot of talking to psychologists and psychiatrists, and a ton of reading. But you never say never. I think that I have other books in the works, and I'm very excited about those too.
Oh, great. Can you say anything about those ones yet for people to kind of keep an eye out?
They're kind of in gleam form. I'm writing one. For some reason, my characters are all prosecutors, and in the book I have a first person like you do, DelSheree. She's a coroner, and she's in Fairplay, Colorado, and her father was the coroner, and she's also a pathologist, because again, combining characters, because a coroner doesn't necessarily have to be a medical doctor. So I have her father, something happens to her father, that's her inciting incident, as she comes home and she finds herself the coroner of this community. So they're all like that. It's just, an inciting incident brings these stories to life.
Oh, great. I like the idea of that, and I'd love to hear back from you when you're ready with that one to have another chat about.
Thank you.
Well, no, we're just about out of time, but I wanted to remind readers the 2 books that we were talking about today are Black Pearl and Until Dead, and those are by Donnell Ann Bell. And tell people where they can find you and your books.
You can find me on my website, which is www.donnellannbell.com. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. Wherever books are sold, you can find my books. You can find them at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Books A Million. And there are links on my website that will help people find books, because you can just find them. So.
Well, good. And
Thank you for this opportunity.
Oh, I'm so glad to be able to read your books and chat with you about them. I definitely, for people who like suspense and mystery, highly recommend them. I really enjoyed it, and it was a lovely break from my work life lately, which has been kind of chaotic.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Oh, it'll get better eventually. We just launched a newspaper, and it was bound to be chaos, but yeah, well, it'll work itself out, hopefully. But yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to talk today, and I wish you the best with finishing up book 3.
Thank you so much.
Did you enjoy that podcast? We hope that you did. And if you did, share it with your friends. And if you really want to keep podcasts like this coming, please support KSJE. You can do it easily online at ksje.com.